is a 2005 Ford GT. And in fact, it's my 2005 Ford GT. I bought it over the weekend, and it is, quite simply, the craziest thing I've ever done. Today, I'm gonna tell you about it, then I'm gonna take you on a little tour of it, and from now on, all my Ford GT updates will be on my new second channel, More Doug DeMuro. The first update goes live tomorrow. First, we start with the obvious question. Why did I buy a 2005 Ford GT? And there's a simple answer: because it is one of the all-time greatest cars I have ever driven. Back in high school, in 2005, I was in high school when the car first came out. And I remember thinking it was incredibly cool, but I also assumed it was probably just cool looking and presumably terrible to drive because this was Ford in 2005 and they were also making this. But 2 years ago, I went up to Toronto to drive a Ford GT that belonged to my friend Zach, and I filmed a video with it for my channel, and I was stunned to discover that it's actually an incredible car. The steering feel is amazing. The acceleration is fantastic. The driving experience is wonderful. The shifter and clutch action are so perfect. It was actually a dramatic improvement over the other exotic cars from its day, the Ferrari F430 and 550, the Lamborghini Gallardo, and even the Porsche 911 Turbo. I couldn't believe that the very best exotic car from the mid-2000s, short of the Carrera GT, came from mid-2000s Ford. But it did. And ever since then, I have wanted one of these, but prices have kept me away. You see, the Ford GT from this generation ranges from around $200,000 at the low end, all the way up to around $500,000 for one of those Heritage Edition models with the Gulf blue and orange color scheme and with no miles on it. This one was on the very low end of that spectrum, but it's still an incredible amount of money for me. I say that because I want to emphasize how big of a decision this was for me. These days, car YouTubers seem to be buying a new exotic car every week, and they seem to gravitate towards the flavor of the month, whatever McLaren or Lamborghini is hot at this very moment. Now, that's fine. I love watching those videos. I think they're all interesting and hilarious, but that's not me. I agonized over this decision for the last several months, and I can't tell you how many sleepless nights I had trying to decide whether it was even acceptable to spend this much money on a car. I've never done anything like this before, and I didn't grow up around this stuff. When I was a kid, my dad had a Toyota Camry and my mom had an Isuzu Rodeo. This kind of thing is totally alien for me, and I've never spent this much money before on anything. With that said, one major item made this decision a little bit easier for me. Back in 2005, the original price of this car was around $150,000. And these days, even a car with accident history seems to go for around $200,000. These cars have never really gone down in value. And so I feel like this is a car that I can buy and enjoy for a little while or a long while and not really lose much of any money to depreciation. Consider this: if the owner of this car had instead bought a 2005 Ford Explorer back in 2005, he would have spent like $35,000 for the Explorer and it would be worth basically nothing today. Instead, he spent $150,000 on this and it went up in value. In fact, it would have cost him a lot more to own the Ford Explorer than the Ford GT. And that wasn't the only thing that I considered. Another is the fact that this car is unusually reliable for a supercar. Ultimately, this is a Ford with Ford parts and a Ford engine. A lot of that stuff, of course, is specialized, but this car isn't as fragile as most other exotics, and I don't expect it to be as temperamental or as difficult to deal with as a lot of the Italian exotic cars. And then, of course, there's the fact that I live pretty simply. I don't wear watches or do jewelry. When I travel, I stay in Best Westerns and Airbnbs. I don't go to clubs or even drink at all. And well, you guys already know about my clothes. I don't exactly wear the most expensive ones. So with all of that in mind, I figured maybe it was time to live a little. But the biggest factor that made me decide to buy the Ford GT is the fact that, frankly, I just really love the Ford GT. This car is just so amazingly sweet to drive, and it is so much fun. And so with that, let me take you on a little tour of my GT. As you can see, my GT is dark blue with white stripes. It has about 31,000 miles on it, although I put on another 130 miles on my first day with it, so it's gonna keep going up. Now, I bought this car from the original owner, KARL BRAUER, who himself bought it in August 2005, brand new. Here is the most staged ceremony ever, where KARL officially hands me the keys to his Ford GT after 13 years of ownership. Now, interestingly, I knew the original owner of this car, and I've driven this exact car before. KARL works with me at AutoTrader. He oversees a lot of the stuff I do for autotrader.com/oversteer. I filmed a video with KARL's Dodge Demon earlier this year, and I actually filmed a comparison between the new Ford GT and the old Ford GT, this one, in Utah last year. KARL has chronicled the history of this car since day one on his website, karlbrauer.com. Basically, he's covered everything important that's happened to this car since he bought it new off the showroom floor with 7 miles on it 13 years ago. Anyway, now on to some of the interesting quirks. Now, I don't want to show you everything. I've already done kind of a quirks and features video on this car. Plus, I have a lot of other updates coming on more Doug DeMuro, but I do want to show you a few of the things that make the GT interesting, starting with opening stuff. I'm going to start with the front. Now, obviously, the engine is in the back, so the front there's a little storage compartment, and accessing it is kind of weird. Easily, you can just push a button on the key fob, it pops it open, you walk up and open it. That's the easy way to do it, but there's also a hard mode. To do that, you stick the key into this little keyhole on the fender, you twist it, and then you pull up on this latch. Now, the latch releases it, but you actually have to keep the latch pulled up while you go over here, and at the same time open up the front compartment, which is very annoying. Now, you might be wondering what exactly is in the front compartment, and the answer is not much. Well, at least not much in terms of storage. You really can't get anything in here. This is clearly not a vehicle made for long road trips with big bags, but you could put a small bag in here if you wanted to do a few nights on the road in your Ford GT. Now, next up, we move on to the fuel door, which is also an unusual item that opens in the GT. Once again, you take your key over to this fender keyhole, you insert it, and then you twist, and you can see that's doing something, but it doesn't open the fuel door. That's because you have to twist and once again pull this latch, and then the fuel door pops open and you can put gas in your Ford GT. But probably the most interesting item to open in the whole car is the engine cover, which has kind of an unusual process to it. For one, in order to open it, the latch is not located in the front in the driver footwell like most cars. Instead, it's on the roof between the two seats, which of course is right where it actually opens. Now, once you've gotten it to this point, you kind of lift it a little bit, but then there's something you have to do. That's because this car has one individual latch on either side, 2 total, one over here and one over there. And what you're supposed to do is unlatch one, then walk around and unlatch the other, or more appropriately, you're just supposed to use 2 people to open the engine cover in your Ford GT. Now, fortunately, the previous owner of this car installed a modification where there's a bar that connects the 2 latches. You just push the bar down, and then you can open the engine cover yourself, revealing the massive V8 here in the Ford GT. And when you have the engine cover up, it looks really cool. It's like you're pulling off an enormous portion of this car's bodywork. It's like you're taking it down to the actual essentials, what it actually needs in order to move. But even with the engine cover open, you will notice that this back part stays put, which seems like kind of an unusual decision. And indeed, the original Ford GT40 race cars from the 1960s, when you'd open their engine cover, the entire clamshell and back would come up, including this part. So why did Ford leave this in place? Well, because they have to. By government regulation, the tail lights and brake lights cannot be on a piece that moves. And so as a result, the engine cover comes up, but this part had to stay put because obviously they wanted to fit the car with brake lights. So the brake lights had to stay in place, and they do, and this meets the requirement. Now, our next interesting GT detail relates to the headlights. Now, Ford made the GT to commemorate its 100th anniversary in the early 2000s. And as you can see, there's a little 100 in the headlights, a little strip on the side, and then the lights themselves are the 2 zeros. The headlights were supposed to be kind of an Easter egg that says 100 for Ford's 100th birthday, which is kind of cool. The problem is the car is symmetrical, obviously, and so on the other side it says 001 rather than 100. But if you look at the car on the driver's side from the front, you will see the 100th anniversary Easter egg. Now, next up, I'm going to move on to the interior of the GT, where there are a couple of interesting quirks and features, starting with the doors, which have roofs on them. Now, I have an update on more Doug DeMuro coming tomorrow that focuses on the doors, but suffice it to say, they're very strange. Now in the interior, there are a few things that are kind of unfortunate, and there are a few things that are absolutely fantastic. The unfortunate stuff mostly relates to the shared Ford parts. Obviously, this was an expensive car back in '05, and it's even more expensive now, and so it's kind of funny to see, for example, the turn signal stock pulled straight out of the Ford Focus. Same with the windshield wiper stock. They didn't even bother making unique ones for the Ford GT. Same goes with the window switches. They're exactly what you would have had in sort of an average Ford product in 2005, but my favorite is the key fob. It's got that same square key fob that like the Ford Explorer used and most other Fords from this era. So there are a few things to remind you that even though you're in this crazy cool limited production supercar, you are ultimately in a Ford. But with that said, there's also a bunch of cool stuff in this interior, starting with the climate controls, which are mounted in the center console. And you can see there are these cool little silver buttons and dials, and they're just kind of floating there. They don't have any ugly plastic around them. They're very cool, unique to the GT, and they feel very nice when you touch them and push them and move them around. They're very cool. Same goes for the shifter, which has sort of that silver theme carried on, and the parking brake. But the thing that I personally love the most in this interior are these 5 toggle switches for the lights, the fog lights, the interior dimmer, the rear defrost, and the hazard lights. They all look absolutely awesome. They're supposed to be sort of a retro thing that reminds us of the old GT, but they also just feel really cool to touch and press. And I have to admit, sometimes I'm driving down the road and I kind of flick the hazard lights on for a second just to feel how they feel. It's really a cool look. Probably the biggest drawback in the interior, though, is the seats. Now, Ford made these seats with these cool little holes in them to kind of make it look like an old-time race car seat, and it does accomplish that, and the seats look really cool. The problem is, each one of those holes is like plastic, and so when you sit on the seats, it's very uncomfortable on your back. There's a reason people prefer leather seats with a lot of bolstering and cushioning over plastic holes digging into you, but nonetheless, that's what you get. And honestly, I've said before and I'll say again, if just getting a pillow and putting it behind your back is the biggest problem with this car, and frankly, I think it is, then you get a pretty good car on your hands. Okay, so those are some of the quirks of the GT, and now I'm gonna take you on a little drive in it. All right, driving the GT. I've wanted to drive my own GT for years, and I can't believe I'm actually doing it. You'll notice the previous owner installed a little Bluetooth microphone. Hello, everyone. That's not what that does. The thing that I think I like the most about the GT is that it's able to be really drivable and easy while still being insane. So by drivable and easy, what I mean is, like, it's a Ford in the interior in the sense that, like, there's an air conditioner from a Ford, and, like, you know, the turn signal stocks, they're cheap looking, but they're just from a Ford, and all this stuff works like you'd expect in a normal car because Ford didn't really know how to do anything else. They didn't know that they could make some compromises and people would forgive them for it. The clutch is so monstrously easy, but there's still enough feel that it's fun. And that's perfect. And the shifter in this car is amazing. This car has a short throw shifter, which is what Ford intended to put in from the factory. Because it was deemed too expensive, they pulled it out and made it a Ford racing option. And the owner of this car and the owner of most GTs installed the short throw. But even the regular non-short throw feels absolutely tremendous. Both of them feel great. It slots right into gear perfectly. It feels like the most perfect Porsche models, and they do shifters better than just about anybody. So the stage is set in terms of drivability. It's easy to drive. Shifter, gear lever are great, satisfying to use. The interior, everything works. But you look at it on the outside, and it's like more insane than any exotic sports car that, you know, existed at the time. I mean, you're like, this is a real car, not a concept car. It's crazy. And of course, it's also incredibly monstrously fast. From the factory, they had 550 horsepower. Virtually every GT owner installs a pulley, a supercharger pulley, and reflashes the ECU to get a little bit more power out of it, this one included. So this one's making something like 700, 680, something like that horsepower, and it's just massively fast. Now, I personally am scared of the car. These things don't have traction control, no stability control. Frankly, this is a poor man's Carrera GT. Obviously, it's not a poor man's anything given what they cost, but a Carrera GT is $900,000, $800,000, and I can't afford one of those and probably never will. So this is kind of like the next best thing. It was from the same era, also mid-engine, also kind of a once in a generation type car. But with that said, I am definitely scared of it. Like I said, all this power and no traction control, you gotta be careful. and I'm gonna be careful, and I think I'm gonna spend the first several months with this car just kind of taking it easy and getting to know it. But you don't have to drive it hard for this car to be satisfying. Just kind of accelerating like this, you feel the monstrous torque, you go through the gears with this wonderful shifter and clutch, and the steering is amazing. I've driven a million 430s. The 430 Scoot drives similar to this car, but it's on a manual. But the 430, which was the competitor to this car, the Ferrari 430, the steering was so light, and it was very good, but it was so light, and it felt like a Lexus, honestly. It just wasn't right. And this car has heavier steering, it has more precise steering. Ford somehow managed to out Ferrari, which is kind of funny if you know the history of the GT and the GT40. You know, I have had a lot of weird cars. I've had Ferrari, I had a 360. But I've also had basically everything from a Prius to an Aston Martin to a Land Rover, a bunch of them, to, you know, M3, everything. And I don't say this car is awesome just because I have it. I have it because it's awesome. I went out and bought this car because I've driven a lot of stuff, and to me, this car kind of provides an experience that, frankly, most others don't, even other cars of this era. And the cherry on top, of course, is that it isn't losing value. And to me personally, I think one of the big reasons why this car isn't losing value and never really lost value is because of this tremendous driving experience. I think this car has been rewarded in the secondary market because people just love to drive it. Now, I specifically wanted a car with some miles. 31,000 miles is very high for one of these. I specifically wanted a car that had been driven because I plan to drive it a lot. I've already driven 145 miles since I bought it yesterday. And I didn't want a car that I had to pay a premium for 4,000 original miles, mint condition, plastic everywhere, and then eventually I would drive it a lot and I would lose all the value. The whole point of this car is that it kind of keeps its value, and I didn't want it to just sit in my garage keeping its value. I wanted to drive it and kind of pay a little less and get some of that lower value myself. I've been anxious about buying this car pretty much since I wrote the check. Actually, for the 2 months before that, and I mean the week before, I truly could not sleep. I was like, and not out of excitement, more like, is this the right decision? Did I do this? Is this smart? And I'm happy to say, I still feel that way, but I'm happy to say, when I'm in the car, I feel better about it. I feel like, yeah, this thing is awesome, and I'm gonna have this thing for a while and just appreciate it. And so that's my Ford GT, my latest Doug car. Now, for prior Doug cars, I've always done a poll, and I've asked you to help me choose which Doug car, and then I've taken all the suggestions and compiled them, and I've gone with one of the most popular suggestions as the car I actually bought. You might be wondering why I didn't do that this time, and the simple answer is it just doesn't really work all that well. Here's what I mean. This is a graph of the views on the videos with my Aston Martin Doug car over time. You see how they kind of start to go down? That's because it seems to me that it doesn't really matter what car a YouTuber buys. The audience is really engaged for the first few videos, but then eventually they just kind of lose interest and they want to see something else. And it isn't just me. Take a look at Hoovie's garage and his Rolls-Royce Phantom. His first 2 videos in that car were incredibly popular, but his next 2 didn't do anywhere near as well. They didn't even get half as many views. And it's the same story with Tavarish's cheap Lamborghini. When he first got that car at the start of the year, interest was through the roof, but over time it's just kind of declined like everything else. Frankly, people just lose interest. So I figured instead of asking you what car you wanted to see, where you will inevitably get bored, I would buy a car that I actually wanted to own. And so that way, when you get bored, I won't be driving around in some car that you made me get. Instead, I'll be driving around in a car that I actually wanted. In this case, a car that I've always wanted. And this is precisely that. And so now it's time for me to go have some fun in my new car. See ya.